Imagine 17 low-cost drones flying through the night, completely cut off from their operators, navigating hostile territory without GPS and targeting one of the most heavily defended military installations in Russia. This isn't science fiction. This is what happened at Angles Air Base on June 6, 2025, when Ukrainian Osad drones demonstrated how artificial intelligence and swarm tactics can defeat a $500 million air defense network. What you're about to discover will change the way you think about modern warfare, autonomous systems, and the rapidly evolving battlefield of the future. At 3 in the morning on that June day, 17 Ukrainian Osad drones converged on Angles Air Base like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. These weren't sophisticated military-grade systems. They were basically flying lawnmowers cobbled together from parts you could order online. Yet they had been airborne for 6 straight hours, covering over 750 kilometers of hostile Russian territory. No GPS guidance, no communication between the drones themselves. And here's the kicker. For the final 30 minutes of their approach, they operated with zero human control whatsoever. Their artificial intelligence systems were entirely in charge, making split-second decisions that would soon demonstrate how cheap components and smart software can defeat even the most expensive defense systems on the planet. The lead drone's thermal camera locked onto the heat signatures emanating from the Crystal Fuel Depot below. But this wasn't just a simple target identification system. The sensor was feeding raw data into a neural network that had been meticulously trained on over 10,000 satellite images of this exact facility. The AI didn't just recognize the depot, it understood it intimately. Tank configurations, pipeline layouts, structural vulnerabilities. Every critical detail had been burned into its digital memory through countless hours of machine learning. Through the grainy, low-resolution thermal image, measuring just 640 by 480 pixels, 4 massive circular tanks glowed brilliant white against the cold ground. The AI's edge detection algorithm went to work immediately, outlining each storage tank, assigning unique identifiers, and running sophisticated temperature analysis on every target. Tank number 4 registered 15.7 degrees Celsius. Tank number 7 came in at 12.1 degrees. Tank 12 showed 11.8 degrees, while Tank 1 measured 13.2 degrees. That seemingly small 3.6-degree temperature difference told the AI everything it needed to know. Tank number 4 had been recently filled, which meant maximum vapor pressure, maximum volatility, and maximum potential for catastrophic destruction. Here's where things get genuinely unsettling. Each of the 17 drones was running this exact same analysis completely independently. There was no central command coordinating their actions, no voting system to reach consensus. Just 17 identical artificial brains processing the same thermal data, applying the same algorithms, and reaching 17 identical conclusions in perfect synchronization. Tank number 4 would be hit first. But the distributed intelligence didn't stop at simply identifying the primary target. Each drone incorporated its own unique serial number into its attack vector calculations. Drone 1 would strike from bearing 270. Drone 2 from 275, creating a 5-degree offset. This autonomous coordination created overlapping blast patterns while simultaneously preventing mid-air collisions. Think of it like 2 people throwing rocks at the same target from slightly different positions. Close enough to maximize impact, but separated enough that they won't collide with each other during the approach. As the drone swarm closed in on the base, their cellular connection weakened to just 1 bar of signal strength. At this extreme range from the Ukrainian border, the hijacked Russian SIM cards they were using struggled desperately to maintain contact with the nearest cell towers. In 30 seconds, when the drones descended below 50 meters for their final attack run, they would become completely autonomous, fully locked onto their designated targets with no possibility of recall. The operators sitting safely back in Kyiv were about to become mere spectators to their own operation, watching helplessly as their creations executed pre-programmed instructions with mechanical precision. Each drone's flight controller, a Chinese knockoff of the popular Pixhawk system that cost just $89 on AliExpress, was running collision avoidance calculations 10 times every single second. Ultrasonic sensors created an invisible 2-meter protective bubble around each aircraft. When turbulence or wind gusts pushed the drones too close together, micro-adjustments automatically kept them separated. The system had worked flawlessly for 6 hours. It just needed to function perfectly for 5 more minutes. At 10 kilometers out, the loose formation began its transformation. What had started as a casual grouping of airborne vehicles suddenly aligned into a precise attack matrix. Imagine watching a flock of birds suddenly shift from random flight into a perfect V formation, except this reorganization wasn't about aerodynamic efficiency or energy conservation. This was about maximizing destructive impact with zero interference between individual units. The artificial intelligence had calculated optimal impact angles based on detailed knowledge of fuel tank construction and structural engineering. 7 drones climbed to 80 meters altitude. They would dive onto the tank roofs where the steel plating was thinnest. 5 maintained 50 meters elevation to strike the upper walls where volatile fuel vapors naturally collect. The remaining 5 descended to 30 meters, targeting the lower sections where decades-old structural welds were most vulnerable to catastrophic failure. The S-400 air defense radar beam swept overhead at exactly 3:01 local time, passing directly through the airspace that the drones had occupied just 2 seconds earlier. The radar operator saw absolutely nothing on his screen. The drones were flying below his radar horizon, hidden by the simple curvature of the Earth itself. But something felt deeply wrong to him. The night was unnaturally quiet. No commercial air traffic. No military transport flights. Even the local bird populations seemed to have vanished from the sky. An experienced operator develops instincts about these things, and his instincts were screaming that something was approaching. Inside the lead drone's memory, a simple countdown timer ticked relentlessly towards 0. At predetermined GPS coordinates, the autopilot would assume complete control. No human could abort the mission. No jamming system could confuse it. The drone would execute its final programmed instructions with the mindless, unstoppable dedication of a mechanical wind-up toy. Point the nose at tank number 4. Maintain exactly 42 meters per second airspeed. Detonate on impact, nothing more, nothing less. The cellular signal dropped to 0 bars at exactly 3:02 in the morning. 17 drones simultaneously switched to full autonomous mode. 17 explosive payloads committed irrevocably to their assigned targets. 17 algorithms that could no longer be reasoned with, bargained with, or stopped by anything short of direct physical destruction or an absolute miracle. As the drone swarm headed toward Engels Air Base, the fuel depot sat protected by an air defense network that cost more than Ukraine's entire drone development program. The first defensive layer was an S-400 missile battery positioned 3 kilometers northwest of the depot. This $500 million system could theoretically engage ballistic missiles in the vacuum of space, stealth fighters at ranges exceeding 400 kilometers, and cruise missiles flying low enough to hug terrain features. The massive 92N6E fire control radar pumped out enough electromagnetic energy to microwave a frozen turkey at 10 kilometers distance. But physics doesn't care about impressive marketing brochures or manufacturer specifications. At the drone's current altitude of 50 meters, the S-400 system physically couldn't detect them until they closed to within 28 kilometers, and that was only under absolutely perfect atmospheric conditions. Tonight, with ground clutter from buildings and temperature inversions bending radar waves unpredictably, the effective detection range was reduced to barely 20 kilometers. Radar systems absolutely hate looking downward through environmental clutter. Buildings, trees, and pockets of hot and cold air scatter the radar signal in thousands of directions. It's remarkably similar to trying to find your car keys after someone has cleaned and reorganized your entire house. Even when you know approximately where they should be, you somehow can't locate them anywhere. By the time the drone swarm finally appeared on radar scopes, they would have less than 5 minutes until impact. That's plenty of time if you're tracking a single conventional fighter jet following a predictable flight path. It's nowhere near enough time to engage a coordinated swarm of tiny targets that you can barely even detect on radar in the first place. The S-400's engagement computer frantically searched through its threat library, containing over 10,000 different aircraft and missile signatures, painstakingly collected over decades of military intelligence operations. An F-15 fighter at 50 miles? Got it, no problem. An air-to-surface cruise missile? Piece of cake. But a basic quadcopter drone with the radar cross-section of a large bird moving at the airspeed of a small civilian Cessna. That signature wasn't anywhere in the database. The system's artificial intelligence classified these unknown contacts as either irrelevant clutter or extremely low-priority threats. It had been programmed to stop sophisticated weapons, not cheap commercial drones. Even the S-400's backup systems faced insurmountable problems. 4 Pantsir S-1 short-range air defense units ringed the fuel depot like guard dogs protecting a junkyard. Each unit cost $15 million and bristled with 12 57E6 missiles plus twin 30mm rapid-fire cannons. The marketing videos showed them effortlessly swatting cruise missiles and precision-guided bombs from the sky with casual efficiency. What those promotional videos conveniently didn't mention was the minimum radar cross-section required for effective engagement. 0.1 square meters. The Osad drones approaching the facility had a radar signature of just 0.01 square meters. That's 10 times smaller than the system's design threshold. While it's not theoretically impossible to hit a target that small, it would be roughly equivalent to trying to shoot a single mosquito with a hunting rifle while it's flying erratically around your backyard. You might get incredibly lucky, but you're going to waste an enormous amount of ammunition attempting it. Even when a Pantsir's thermal imaging system managed to visually spot a drone, calculating an effective engagement solution became a nightmare. The 57E6 missile requires continuous radar illumination to guide it accurately to the target. But trying to maintain a radar lock on a small plastic drone is like trying to track a black cat running through a coal mine using only a dim flashlight. The command guidance link flickered, broke, re-established itself, then broke again repeatedly. The missile's proximity fuse, carefully calibrated to detect aircraft constructed from aluminum and steel, frequently failed to recognize composite plastic materials at all. The Russians knew that drones were becoming a serious problem. That's exactly why they had surrounded every strategic military facility with Pol 21 GPS jamming systems, creating powerful electromagnetic bubbles that should theoretically send any Western navigation-dependent drone spinning helplessly off course. The system broadcasts false GPS signals that make receivers believe they're located somewhere over the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from their actual position. But the Russian military planners hadn't accounted for one critical factor. The Osad drones navigated exactly like aircraft from 1943. No GPS whatsoever, just magnetic compasses, accelerometers, and old-fashioned dead reckoning navigation. The sophisticated jamming systems that would completely cripple a million-dollar surveillance drone meant absolutely nothing to these flying lawnmowers. You simply cannot jam technology that isn't even present in the system. It's like bringing a computer virus to a knife fight, completely irrelevant. At Engels Air Base, there were a dozen massive cylindrical fuel storage tanks, each measuring 20 meters in diameter and holding approximately 2,000 tons of aviation fuel. The facility designers back in 1962 had carefully spaced them 30 meters apart, close enough that maintenance crews could efficiently share equipment between tanks, but far enough apart that a single conventional bomb couldn't destroy two tanks simultaneously. Of course, those Cold War engineers were thinking about B-52 strategic bombers dropping massive steel bombs, not coordinated drone swarms carrying shaped charges specifically designed to penetrate tank roofs. The automated fire suppression system looked impressively sophisticated in the climate-controlled command center. Green indicator lights confirmed that 50,000 liters of firefighting foam stood ready for immediate deployment, with deluge nozzles strategically positioned every 10 meters and heat sensors continuously monitoring for the slightest temperature spike. What those reassuring green lights didn't reveal was that the foam concentrate had expired years ago, that half the spray nozzles were completely clogged with rust and corrosion, and that the entire system had been designed to handle a single tank fire, not simultaneous explosions across multiple facilities. By this point, the drones were just 15 kilometers out and closing rapidly. On radar screens scattered across the base, operators saw only the usual background clutter. Migrating birds created false returns. Temperature layers in the atmosphere bent radio waves into ghost signals. Somewhere hidden within that electronic noise, 17 genuine threats maintained perfect formation, invisible not because they employed sophisticated stealth technology, but simply because they were too crude and basic to register as legitimate threats. At 3:03 in the morning, a radar operator watched a contact suddenly materialize on his Pantsire S1 display, sending chills down his spine. 8 kilometers out, altitude 50 meters, speed 151 kilometers per hour. His extensive training kicked in immediately. That's too slow for any missile system, too fast for any bird species, too low for anything that should legitimately be flying in restricted airspace at this hour. He slewed the electro-optical turret onto the bearing and switched to maximum magnification. The thermal imager revealed a small heat signature against the cold ground. 4 rotating propellers, a central body structure. Definitely a drone, but smaller than anything cataloged in his threat recognition database. Then he saw another contact, and another. His mouth went completely dry as he counted 17 distinct contacts spread across a 3-kilometer-wide front. The range counter spun down relentlessly. 7 kilometers, then 6.5. At current speed, impact would occur in 130 seconds, just over 2 minutes. The operator didn't waste precious seconds waiting for authorization from higher command. His thumb slammed down on the auto-engage button, deliberately overriding safety interlocks that existed for very good reasons. The first 57E6 missile exploded from its launch tube in a spectacular fountain of fire and smoke. The solid rocket motor accelerated it to Mach 2.8 in just 3 seconds, racing toward the lead drone at supersonic speed. But something was fundamentally wrong. The radar return flickered like a dying light bulb. The missile's command receiver struggled desperately to maintain any kind of lock on a target that barely existed in the electromagnetic spectrum. At 2.1 kilometers from the drone, the proximity fuse made its programmed calculation. It was searching for a radar cross-section large enough to trigger automatic detonation. But the Osad drone was simply too small. The fuse decided this wasn't a valid military target. The million-ruble missile streaked past, missing by barely 3 meters. Close enough that the drone wobbled violently in the missile's supersonic wake, but not close enough to cause any actual damage. The battery fired again, but now the drone executed a pre-programmed evasive pop-up maneuver. It climbed 20 meters in 2 seconds, then dove aggressively back down to 30 meters altitude. The missile's guidance computer, programmed to expect predictable aircraft behavior patterns, lost track completely. Another million rubles worth of precision Russian engineering sailed off uselessly into the darkness. Across the depot perimeter, 3 additional Panzer batteries opened fire simultaneously. The night sky transformed into a pyrotechnic show as missiles chased ghosts and tracer rounds from 30mm cannons created beautiful golden arcs through the darkness. But hitting a drone-sized target at 3 kilometers range with an automatic cannon is remarkably similar to trying to throw a dart at a fly buzzing around your backyard. You might get extremely lucky, but you'll waste an enormous quantity of darts in the attempt. The explosive rounds self-destructed after 4 seconds of flight time, creating distinctive puffs of black smoke that marked each failure. The Tor M2 system activated its sophisticated phased array radar, desperately sweeping for targets. But it faced exactly the same fundamental problem. The drones were flying below the system's minimum engagement zone. The Tor system, which should theoretically track 48 targets simultaneously, could barely maintain a lock on even one. The frustrated operator watched contacts flicker in and out of existence like fireflies on a summer night, never remaining solid enough for a weapons-grade targeting lock. At 3:06, pure luck finally intervened. A missile's proximity fuse happened to catch a drone during a banking turn, when it briefly presented its maximum possible radar cross-section. The warhead detonated violently, sending 50,000 tungsten fragments screaming through the air at supersonic velocity. The drone disintegrated in an orange flash, raining burning plastic debris across the empty steppe below. 16 drones remained, now inside 3 kilometers, well inside minimum missile engagement range. The only remaining defensive option was the twin 30mm cannons. But those weapons were now aimed directly at Russia's own fuel depot. One stray round, one unlucky ricochet, and the defenders might accomplish the enemy's mission for them, destroying their own facility. The formation adjusted with cold machine precision. The surviving drones spread out even further, forcing the defenders to split their fire across multiple vectors. Some climbed to steeper attack angles, others dove closer to the ground. The swarm had lost one member, but retained its fundamental purpose unchanged. The algorithms didn't mourn their fallen comrade. They simply recalculated optimal attack patterns and continued the mission. At 3:07, the defensive fire noticeably slackened. Missile stocks depleted, gun barrels glowing cherry red from sustained fire. Hit probability calculations showing single-digit percentages. The defenders could only watch helplessly as 16 drones entered their final attack runs, each one locked irreversibly onto its destined portion of the fuel depot. At exactly 3:08, the lead drone slammed into tank number 4. The 3.2-kilogram warhead, shaped like an inverted copper cone, punched effortlessly through 8 millimeters of steel roofing as if it were aluminum foil. The detonation occurred 0.3 seconds later, after the warhead had penetrated deep into the vapor space above 2,000 tons of aviation fuel. The physics of what happened next was simultaneously beautiful and absolutely terrifying. The explosion created a pressure wave traveling at 28 meters per second through the fuel-air mixture inside the tank. This wasn't a Hollywood-style fireball rolling dramatically across the ground. This was a genuine detonation that converted liquid fuel into expanding gas faster than the tank structure could possibly contain it. The roof didn't just blow off. It transformed into a 15-ton steel frisbee, spinning through the air before crashing down 200 meters away. Tank number 4's walls peeled back like a banana skin, releasing a tsunami of burning fuel. The fuel, heated to 1800 degrees Celsius, flowed across the containment berm that had been designed to prevent minor leaks, not catastrophic structural failure. Within seconds, the raging inferno reached the manifold connections to tank number 5. Steel pipes rated for 20 atmospheres of pressure became fuses leading directly to the next explosion. The second drone impacted tank number 1 10 seconds later, then tank number 7, then tank number 12. Each strike was precisely timed to create maximum cascading failure across the entire facility. The depot's automated fire suppression system activated immediately, pumping foam at 10,000 liters per minute. But it was like spitting on an active volcano. The foam supply exhausted completely in 90 seconds, having barely covered 1/4 of the burning surface area. The heat was beyond human comprehension. At 100 meters from the fires, radiant energy reached 50 kilowatts per square meter. That's enough thermal radiation to cause wood to spontaneously ignite without any direct flame contact. Fire trucks racing from Angle's airbase couldn't approach closer than 500 meters before their paint began bubbling and peeling. The crews watched helplessly as their thermometers maxed out completely. Inside the depot's underground pipeline network, fuel continued flowing from undamaged tanks directly toward the fires, feeding them like arteries, supplying blood to a beating heart. Emergency shutoff valves designed in the 1960s failed one by one as their rubber seals melted. Each valve failure added thousands more tons of fuel to the growing inferno. At 3:18, tank number 6 suffered what's known in the industry as a bleave, boiling liquid, expanding vapor explosion. The tank didn't just burn, it detonated like a massive bomb. This wasn't ordinary aviation fuel burning. This was the highly specialized fuel blend specifically required for Tu-160 and Tu-95MS strategic bomber operations. The chemical additives that prevent fuel from freezing at 50,000 feet altitude make it impossible to substitute regular aviation kerosene. For the price of a modest apartment in Moscow, Ukraine had just reached out 750 kilometers deep into Russian territory and effectively grounded Russia's entire nuclear bomber fleet. Every airbase commander from Murmansk in the far north to Vladivostok in the far east was now making exactly the same calculation. If cheap plastic drones can fly 600 kilometers through defended airspace to strike critical infrastructure, and Moscow is only 700 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, what comes next? This attack demonstrated something that military strategists are only beginning to fully comprehend. The age of expensive, centralized military assets being invulnerable behind sophisticated defenses is rapidly ending. Artificial intelligence, swarm tactics, and mass-produced commercial components are fundamentally changing the calculus of modern warfare. When 17 drones costing less than a luxury car can defeat a $500 million air defense system and cause strategic damage that grounds an entire bomber fleet, the implications extend far beyond this single attack. The future of conflict will be written by those who understand how to effectively combine artificial intelligence, distributed systems, and asymmetric tactics. And that future has already arrived.